how do you get through writer's block? Here's your sledgehammer, hopefully. This is the 9 connections exercise. I think of sources and then try to find connections, and it's really just kind of like focused mind mapping to try to find those connections. So why look for connections? This is red and blue and how to invent the color purple, but it's also representing 2 original ideas, and finding the middle ground is important, finding that connection. This is important because having those original ideas is actually pretty hard. Any like really truly original idea probably been thought of by someone else. It would be hard to just like sit there and come up with something new. Instead, a lot of good can come out of connecting other people's good ideas. So that's what I'm trying to do with this exercise. It's part of just like a daily routine in the morning. I try to do this, the 9 connections. So again, these are the steps. I'll think of 3 sources. I'll just write 3 sources. I try not to like think too far ahead. I just think of things that I read, things that I've listened to lately, things that I watched, or discussions, conversations I've had with friends. And I'll just write them down, like the first things that come to mind. Sometimes I do, think like, oh, there's nothing in there. And then number 2, think of an idea from each source. So in this example, I wrote down Star Wars, Deep Work, the book, and the story grid. And the idea from Star Wars is Master and Apprentice. Deep Work is focusing, having a focused environment. The third one is Story Grid. It's a podcast that I listened. It's a book, but this was referring to the podcast. And there was an episode about like revising and typos. And step 3, think of 2 more connections, and based on those ideas. So I will zoom into this. In the Star Wars case, Master and Apprentice reminded me of Vince McMahon Sr. and Vince McMahon Jr. Probably top of mind because I was watching the Andre the Giant documentary on HBO. Then there's another one here, another connection, Story Grid. The podcast, well, the Master and Apprentice thing there is that Sean Coyne and Tim Grahl are the hosts, and one is really experienced. He was the editor for War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and then Tim Grahl is an upcoming writer, and yeah, they have this Master-Apprentice relationship. So Tim will have a lot of questions, and Sean answers through his experience. Deep Work, focusing environment, some ideas this connects to is just, I was sitting in a coffee place when I was writing these note cards, and I was making this presentation on an iPad, so this is connecting to digital environments and the importance of a digital environment, and being deliberate about it and explicit about your choices there. Reminded me of a book I recently read, Irresistible, and that's about how apps and digital devices are really addicting now, and how that can have a negative effect on your happiness. And then the third one was, let me see if I can go back. Oh yeah, the Story Grid podcast. Sean Coyne talks about, he has this comment about revising and typos, and depending on if you're revising and you're revising the first draft, but you're only focusing on typos and things like that, then you are in the wrong mode for that, and it's probably a waste of time at that point, where you should just be doing like high level stuff, particularly when there will be a different person that can do the copy editing down the road. And this reminded me, 2 ideas this reminded me of was focusing on the wrong thing, and reminded me of Master Apprentice, Yoda, Anakin, or Yoda, Luke, and actually I was thinking more of Anakin here, where he was focusing on love instead of stopping the Sith, and of course it led to him being the most evil person in the galaxy. Then also I've been reading this book called You've Got 8 Seconds about communication. He talks about that idea of tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, that outline for a talk. But he says it's also important, if you want to focus your talk, to tell them what you're not going to tell them. And that's something I've been trying to keep in mind, even like when I'm making this presentation, where they do get a little long, and I should probably learn to cut different things, but not yet. So number 4, there's no 4. So that's it. That's usually what my exercise is. Every day I just try to do that at least once. And I set a timer for 10 minutes, try to get it done. And I do it in a few different ways, which I'll go to, but some of the benefits I've seen from this, just practicing connecting ideas, which was like the core thing I was looking for. I am better at, I think, it's after having done this for a few months, like pretty much every day, I've noticed that I'm able to think of connecting ideas faster. And if I miss a few days, then those connections come a little slower. And then throughout the day, I am better about like connecting different things that to things I've been reading, or like how this can apply. And then I also just build a backlog of outlines because I save these cards, save these. It does become like this small outline. You have a source and another source, and then just a general idea. Not that I've been using these to make anything great, but it's something I can look to just to flip back through, and if I ever want like inspiration for something. And then it just helps me also remember what I read, because I read a lot, I go through a lot of audiobooks, and a lot of times it's a little too much where I just move on to the next thing without really digesting things. So this helps me slow down a little. And then some challenges on the other side of that. Like I mentioned, I have this backlog of outlines. I don't know that I'm using them really well, so I've been thinking about how I could do that better. And one step is sharing them through these videos. Another thing is going too broad instead of staying on course, and that depends on like what method I'm using for actually like doing this exercise. If it is, sometimes I'll type it, or like if I have a keyboard, then I'll tend to go long, and sometimes that can lead to just going like too far out instead of just sticking to general topics. And then the third challenge, sometimes I just can't remember anything that I've read, and that might be more like a brain fog thing. And yeah, 3 ways that I do it. I just showed this example with trying to just write it on a note card, and I use GoodNotes or Notability or just pen and paper and like a real life index card sometimes. Then I also use the app MindNode. That's where I love MindNode for mind mapping, but also that's where I can get kind of away from things and go a little too broad and not stay focused down this path of just staying high level. And then the third way that I do it, and this is the one that I've been most consistent with, is I use an app called Workflow on my iPhone, and it lets you put just like, it's kind of like if this then that. You can just create these sequences of things. So I have one workflow that lets me just press a button, and then it'll just go through these prompts. It'll say like, think of a source, think of another source, think of another source, think of an idea, and then that creates a note in Evernote that I fill out for the rest of the remaining 10 minutes. So if you have writer's block, hopefully this is a new sledgehammer that you can use to break through writer's block. Just connect some ideas and boom. All right, thanks for checking this out. I'll be sharing more of these in the future.